kind of fit God in it.
Yeah.
And I've always done it in the reverse. I'll give you an example. I did a movie called Play the Flute, okay? And Brett Barlow, who was my lead actor, he's one of my favorite people on this planet. If you saw his movie last night. In November of 2015, I asked myself a question. What is a Christian? A Christian is somebody who's serious about the Lord. That's the first thing that came into my mind. And so I was at the AFM, and I went and saw God's Not Dead Part 2. Now, if you didn't like that movie, Tommy didn't write that one, right, Tommy? Okay.
I love them.
But I liked the lawyer guy in there. I would have just made him a believer, but I liked that character because he had an authority about him, and he had a kindness about him, and it gave me an idea. I'm going to do a movie about a youth pastor who takes over this indifferent youth group, and he's going to try to motivate these kids to read God's word and get serious about the Lord. And that lawyer character kind of inspired me, but he's going to do it apart from fun and games. He's going to do it with God's word. And that's how that whole movie started. So when I started writing that script, I had the Brandon Cobb, who was the youth pastor, I wrote all his scenes because that's what I had in my mind. And then I realized as this script is developing, I got to have 5 teenagers and they all got to have an issue. Like one girl was a stutterer and they made fun of her stuttering. So I deal with that. So all 5 kids had a different issue as the story grew, you know. So that's kind of like how that whole thing developed, and it's a process. And thankfully I have a script consultant with my brother, because when I run out of things, I send it to him, okay, help me, you know, that type of thing. So I know nobody asked that question, but that's kind of like how I work scripts. Question?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I think, sorry if this is a redundant question. I know, Bob, you touched on this a lot in your last session, so I'm sorry if this is the same thing. But I wanted to ask, if you're selling your script to a producer, what's to stop the producer from just stealing the script without paying you? I know, Bob, you mentioned, I think yesterday, a couple days ago, that sometimes it's more expensive to...
It's cheaper to buy your script than it is to steal it. Okay? All right? Most people you're going to deal with, especially people here, and especially, I hope, in this Christ-based community, are going to be on the up and up. But you have to just trust. You can't, again, the worst 2 things you can be is desperate and fearful in this industry. Okay? They're the 2 things producers hate when you're either of those things. But you have to just let it go and trust the people. Now that doesn't mean that if a producer comes to you and wants to buy your script, you don't do a deep dive into who they are. And you can do that. And also, because producers are interested in you and what you do and your ability as a writer, when you sit down with a producer, you're not sitting down you're not being subjugated to them. You sit down as a peer and you sit and talk to them, and you get to ask them questions like, what kind of things do you make? What's your philosophy of filmmaking? You know, what ideas do you have for my script? Those are all questions you get to ask. You don't just sit there and say, please take my movie, okay? You are on a level where you can ask people those questions, and you also get to do a deep dive, and look them up on the internet and look at some of the people they've worked with and contact some of those people and say, how was it to work with this person? They're not going to be upset with you. Only people that are going to be upset are the kinds of people that would steal your script.
Like, one thing that, you know how a lot of times when you submit a script, they ask you to sign a release form, and I know some writers can be so fearful of that because they're afraid, but if you aren't willing to do that, because they do get a lot of ideas, then you're never going to get read. In reverse, though, my suggestion is sometimes I've had people approach and say they want people to sign a non-disclosure, and I'm like, you're asking that person to do you a huge favor, but you're telling them you're going to sue them if something happens. So normally I try to suggest, including having an actor read it, that we not put that imposition on other people, especially